Thanks everybody for joining. I'm going to go ahead and just start off here with an introduction and get the ball rolling. So my name is Bill Grismore with 27 Virtual. My role is as Nsxt architect. I'm one of the co-founders of 27 Virtual, and I really want to thank everybody for taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us today. So thank you very much for that. And my role here with the company is primarily focused on, the Nsxt architecture. So leveraging all the different NSX, products from, basic on-prem NSXT to cloud to Avi. There's also the security bucket or also the SD-WAN bucket. But the focus for today is definitely on the NSXT Advanced Load Balancer, also known as Avi. And that's my role at the company. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michael for a quick introduction. Michael.
Yep, thanks, Bill. Mike Ghazala. I'm a staff solutions engineer with VMware in the network and security business unit. So I am a pre-sales engineer that I'd say a vast majority of my time is spent between NSX and Avi, as well as some other things like vRealize Network Insight and that sort of thing. So just really happy to be here and be working with 27 Virtual. And thanks everyone for your time. Looking forward to this. This should be fun.
Great. Sounds good. So thank you, Mike, for that. I'm looking to see for the video. Let me see 1 second. I'll have to look and see as you get started, Mike. If I can get your video turned on, I will as we go forward.
Yeah, no sweat right now.
Right. So why 27 Virtual? Just a quick hit on us. So we're an NSX focused service provider. So we are a VMware partner with a primary focus around NSX. We do a lot more than NSX, but for this particular webinar, we'll keep the focus there. So we started with the EDU business that we started back in 2008. We provide a lot of educational services for the VMware education business unit. And then starting in 2016, we became very focused on consulting. So we really do both education and we do consulting with a focus around NSX originally. We have a great team of cross-trained engineers. We have, NSX VCPNV, VCIXs, VCDXs on staff, vSphere educated and trained people. We also have all our engineers are cross-trained on Avi, and that was day one. Like when Avi came out, we put everybody through all the standard Avi training, and now we have some deployments under our belt. Avi is still fairly new, but we've done a bunch of different types of deployment, over 10 different deployments just for our engineering team ourselves across different solutions. We've done Avi deployments on, front ends for Horizon, for single site, multi-site Horizon, GSLB deployments. We've also done Avi for just plain old vSphere integration. We've also done Avi deployments with the NSXT cloud integration, which is fairly interesting. It does some pretty interesting things the way it integrates with NSXT. So what we bring to the table as a value add partner is highly trained and certified and experienced with lessons learned that we bring to you through a highly rated process from project management to design to deployment and validation. So we leave our customers with a really high quality designed and implemented solution that the customers can then take on that post-deployment or day two journey, as we call it, and really take advantage of that. And one of the great things that we do as a partner is because we have a background in this education, we make sure that all our engagements are focused around enablement, making sure the customer knows how to use the product, kind of teach the fish mentality and get them kind of to the promised land, right? Another interesting thing that we offer is a partner credit transfer program. If you guys are a VMware partner and you're leveraging VMware partner credits, we can consume those as well. So a bunch of different reasons why you could use 27 Virtual. So as I mentioned, specifically for Avi, multiple Avi deployments under our belt, so different types, single site, multi-site, GSLB, Avi load balancer as a front end for Horizon connections and just regular Horizon, and then also the NSXT cloud integration. Another one too that we've been working on is migration. So whether you have an existing F5 set of VIPs and services and pools in a physical, we can help you migrate that over. We have experience doing that as well. We also have a lot of experience doing these V to T migrations and taking existing NSX standard one-armed or multi-home load balancers, and taking those VIPs and pools and migrating them over and making that actually part of the migration process from V to T. And then again, leveraging our expertise as kind of this instructor, this kind of unicorn, if you will, where we provide a particular set of services around not only education, but real life experience in putting those together for our customers, right? So that's kind of where we fit in. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to let Michael take over. Now we're going to have some examples later, but what I'd like to do is just have Michael walk everybody through, what this looks like from a VMware perspective, what the product is, a little bit of the background, and then what the use cases are moving forward. So Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Yep, thanks, Bill. So yeah, just kind of diving right into it. For me, in a nutshell, right, Avi is a software-defined load balancer, right? But I think it helps to kind of understand why it's there and what challenges it's solving for. So I just wanted to take just a couple of minutes to talk about that, and then we'll jump right into Avi, talk about the architecture, and then of course do a demo. So that said, jumping right into it, this is traditionally what we see with, load balancer architectures, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. I know there's probably a lot of people, on the webinar that have been in IT like I have for a while. And this is the same setup we've had for quite a while, right? Whether it's F5 or Citrix or Kemp or something else, it's typically an active standby approach as it relates to load balancers. You have a pair of them. Now, in this case, right, we see that the active unit has, roughly 15% utilization, which is actually higher than what we typically see. Typically, we see closer to like 8% or so, which, the point is lots of wasted resources here, obviously a lot of wasted resources here. So that's kind of the first challenge. The next one is, like I said, you typically have a bunch of pairs. And the problem is, in this case, we have this active unit that is, being hammered, right? It's maybe 90% CPU or something like that. Its standby peer, right, is 0%. And obviously we have lots of capacity over here. So ultimately, to kind of sum it up, right, we have capacity here to be used for load balancing services, but it's useless for us, right? So our only option in this case is really, okay, do we want to do some manual VIP placement? So we can say, let's pull off one of the busy VIPs here, we'll move it over here, that sort of thing. So we can kind of balance it manually. We could over provision. We could just say, you know what, let's buy a new, pair of these. Let's buy something a little beefier, something like that, right? So that's another option. But at the end of the day, I don't think anybody would argue that those are all really good options. They're just things you can do with what you have. All right. So in addition to that, one of the challenges here is also that you have separate points of management. So, clearly here we have a bunch of pairs. Even if you had two pairs, right, you still have to log into a different pair of load balancers, that sort of thing. So that can be challenging. I would even take it a step further. Let's talk about cloud, right? I would say safely 90% of my customers are in, either AWS, Azure, maybe GCP. So if you're doing load balancing in AWS, you might be, say you're in Azure as well, you're doing load balancing there. You're doing load balancing on-prem at your primary location, and maybe you have a DR site. I've had customers that said, we have F5 at the primary, we have Citrix at the DR, we're doing AWS, Elastic load balancer, right? So I think the challenge there is, and I come from an operations background where I have to maintain that. So the last thing I want when it's time to troubleshoot is to have to think about which environment am I in, which caveats apply, what troubleshooting process do I follow, what limitations do I have, along the lines of troubleshooting, that sort of thing. So I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but Avi addresses all of this really, really nicely. All right, so why is Avi awesome? So the first thing is that Avi has a completely different approach to architecture than what we saw. Before, it was that active standby unit. Now we have this concept of the Avi controller, which we see right here. And then we also have what are called service engines, or SEs, right here. So essentially what this is a separation between the management control plane at the top there and the service engines, which are the data plane. So just to kind of round out this picture, right? So these service engines are typically VMs These are your load balancers. So this is actually what traffic is passing through. They are doing the load balancing. I said typically they're VMs because technically you can make these bare metal. But honestly, I would actually even say 100% of the customers I've worked with in the past 2 years as it relates to Avi have been used virtual machine form factor for these service engines or load balancers. So the cool thing is about Avi is that because of this separation of management, control plane, and data plane, it allows you to do some cool things. One of those is scale. So, typically when you think of starting a company, a lot of people would say, let's go after, let's develop a product. Let's go after the little companies. Once we prove it out, work out the bugs, then we'll target the whales. When they started Avi Networks before VMware acquired them, it was completely the reverse approach. So they actually said, let's go after the whales, and then we'll prove it out there, and then we'll kind of expand. So from a scale standpoint, there's really nothing that scales like Avi. It is in some of the largest organizations in the world, Web 2.0 companies, as we used to call them. It's in, vast majority of them. The reason it can scale is because of that separation. So in this case, we have these service engines, right? And you can have one service engine, you can have 50 service engines. The scale is, not only vertical, so that means we could add resources to this service engine. So we could say, let's give it more RAM, vCPU, that kind of thing. In addition to that, we can scale out. So, here we have 3 service engines. We could go out to 4, and we could actually go even much larger if you enable BGP and do some things like that. So the point is scale is not an issue. One of the things that is quite different, I promised it's a lot different than traditional architectures. One area is the ability to do active-active VIPs. So with traditional load balancers, I'll just throw, F5 as an example, right? You have a VIP that exists on active and standby, but it's only active at any given time on your active unit, right? With Avi, that's not the case. We can actually have that same VIP be active and forward traffic on all 3 of these service engines if we wanted to. And the cool thing is that Avi handles a big piece of automating that process for you. So you really don't have to do a whole lot of thinking other than saying, yes, I want it active. It will go find the capacity for you in your service engines. Now, if for some reason it turns out you don't have capacity, that's where it gets really cool because Avi is integrated with vCenter. It's integrated with native AWS and Azure and GCP. So it can actually go out on its own and spin up service engines to service that workload that you just configured. So that's pretty cool. In addition to that, the other thing I wanted to call out here is that, I kind of already hit on it, but this is for all kinds of workloads, not just VMs, right? So I hit on native cloud and also on vCenter environments, but this also includes container environments. So Avi integrates, almost seamlessly with Kubernetes environments, bare metal servers, you name it, Avi can probably load balance it. The other thing I wanted to mention here as well, just a takeaway for the service engines before we start getting into the demo, is that these are stateless. So what I mean by that is the configuration is stored in memory. So if you were to go, log into vCenter and you saw your service engine here and you deleted it, well, in this case, if our VIP was active, the first thing is our service is completely uninterrupted, right? I would say it might be slightly degraded for a moment while it spun up a new service engine, but it's not down. That's the important part. But the cool thing is when Avi sees that go down, it's instantly going to know, well, Mike told me it needed to be on 3 service engines or 4, whatever the case is. I see I lost one, therefore I'm going to spin up a new one in its place. And the controller is the one that pushes that configuration down. So that's kind of a key piece. So the controller, you can think of it at the end of the day as essentially an OVA that you deploy, and it is essentially your single point of management for all of these different environments from a load balancing standpoint. All right, so right before we get into the demo, the last thing I wanted to call out here, this analytics button right here, it should be 5 times bigger than it is on this slide because it is really that big of a deal. When we acquired Avi, I was F5 certified, big fan of F5, big fan, my background is Cisco, that kind of thing. So I was not easily swayed. In fact, I was probably one of the only people at VMware that was, kind of on the fence about the whole acquisition. I didn't really see why we had acquired this company I'd never heard of. Well, I went to Texas, I had some mandatory training, and I got to see the analytics. And up until this point, I saw the architecture and I said, okay, it's a little bit different. I kind of see where they're going. I like that. But the analytics is the magic sauce. That's what makes Avi awesome. And that's why I'm going to actually switch over to the demo right now. And we can start taking a look at that. All right. So let me just rearrange this Zoom stuff a little bit. Okay. So this is Avi. Let me just make sure. Just verifying. Bill, are you able to see? You're able to see Avi right now, right?
Yeah. Another thing too, if you folks have any questions at all, feel free to throw them in the Q&A as well.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I lost the little green thing that said I was sharing. So, okay, we're good. So yeah, this is Avi. Let me go ahead and just refresh. I'm going to have to zoom in. Yeah, I have to log in again. All right, there we go. Okay, so this is the controller. So I mentioned that separation of management plane, data plane. This is the management. So I'm logged into the controller. The first thing you'll see is you have a list of virtual services. These are just VIPs. So if you're familiar with other load balancers, you can think of virtual services as just a VIP. You can see here that I have a few right here. One of the first things that's really important to know about Avi is it's fully multi-tenant. I mean, it is designed from the ground up to be multi-tenant. So you can actually see right here where it says admin, this is actually not the user, that is the name of this tenant. So if I go down here, each one of these are different tenants. So if I go to, for example, I don't know, the Bears tenant, I don't even know what's in here. Yeah, nothing. If I go down to the demo tenant, right, I see I have some other virtual services. So Avi supports full RBAC, so it has the ability to be able to, go through those tenants and allocate resources. So you can actually have dedicated load balancers and a separate team to manage their load balancers all within Avi and still have, control over the whole thing. So that's what I mean from a multi-tenancy standpoint. Once you're in here, so you have the virtual services listed here, and you can actually see, let me double check. Okay, thank you. I was just checking the chat. So you have the virtual services here. You see these little dots next to them, these little colors. That's just a quick health score that is intended so that you can log in here, and I can very quickly, without even diving in, I can see, okay, I have a couple of issues I might want to address, maybe this one right here and this one. So this is, you can drill into these a little bit, but at the end of the day, they're just showing you essentially, is your virtual service healthy? Does it have enough resources on the back end? Is there, has there been a spike in traffic recently? That could be an anomaly. If it's SSL enabled, are you using a self-signed certificate? If you are, then that would, that would hurt your security score, right? So if I go down here, right, we can see this one has a security score or security penalty of -20. That's because we have a self-signed cert. So those are a couple of things that would show up there. So if I just pick one of these and expand it, so this shows me the virtual service here. And then if you go over here, this shows you the different pools behind the virtual service. And then, if you go over even further, it shows you the networks that those backend servers are on. And then of course the backend servers themselves, as well as general kind of status and health. So in this case, we can see we have one of our backend servers is down. That's affecting the pool score here, which is ultimately affecting the score here for the overall virtual service. Now at the bottom here, so, I mentioned the service engines are the data plane. Those are your actual load balancers. This actually shows you which service engines are responsible for load balancing for this virtual service. So that's kind of a key takeaway there. All right, so let's go ahead and continue down that path. So let's drill into that virtual service. So this is going to show you the end-to-end timing chart. Internally, we kind of unofficially call this the mean time to innocence graph, because this is what you show people when they say, hey, it's a load balancer or network problem or whatever the case is. This can help you there. So what you're seeing here is the end-to-end timing or latency for your application, for this Avi demo application, for all users. So the cool thing here, again, if someone called you and said, hey, Mike, something's happening with Avi or with our load balancer, right? Can you look into this service and figure out why it's being slow for our customers, right? You can open this up, and right away, before you even dig in, I would come over here and I would say, okay, well, from here, you have this green, that's client round trip time. That's client to the load balancer. You have server round trip time. That's that thin blue line right here. That is how long from Avi to the backend server. Then you have app response and data transfer. That's this orange and purple. And that is how long did the app itself or the server and app take to respond with the data. So if I come in here, I see this spike and I can tell right off the bat, client round trip time stayed about consistent. That's the green. Server round trip time stayed consistent. Probably not a network issue within our data center or anything like that. In fact, not only that, I would even say not an issue with the client's internet or anything like that. But we do see that the app response and data transfer spiked. So, right off the bat, it looks very suspiciously like it's an application problem and not a network or load balancer. We can continue to drill down that path, which we will. The last thing I wanted to call out here, though, is you have this the ability to change the scope of what you're looking at. So by default, it's 6 hours. You can go back quite a while. So really, as far as you want to go back, you have that ability within Avi. All right, so moving down, if we wanted to drill down a little bit more, one of the areas Avi just absolutely shines is being able to have visibility over individual requests. So that's what we're looking at here. So each of these lines right here represents an individual client request. So that is, me, opening up my iPad, trying to access this service. I get a new entry here with my IP, the URL I was trying to access or the file. And then I also see this same end-to-end timing that you saw before for everybody. I see it for just me for that one request, which is really cool. So, if you kind of look through here, let's see. I got to rearrange Zoom a little bit every time I move. Let's see, I'll just kind of pick on, see if I can get another one here that looks interesting. All right, so maybe this one right here. So I'm going to expand this request right here, and I'll kind of go through what all this means. But this is potentially a bad example, but I don't see any others with high latency on the client side. So in this case, right, if this user called in and said, hey, I had an issue accessing your service, it was super, super slow. I've seen some of these that you come in and they say, client round trip time is 800 milliseconds. But then once it gets to the backend server, it's super quick, right? So that's a good use case for Avi. You could come in and say, well, your client round trip time was 75 milliseconds, not bad. But if they're complaining about it being slow, well, you can see right here, once it hit the load balancer, it was 1 millisecond to the backend server. The app itself responded in less than a millisecond. So, the bulk of this user's experience was really dictated by, their, we'll say, slow round trip time. In this case, I'd say that's not terrible. But like I said, that can be used to quickly identify things like that. All right, so the other thing I wanted to mention while we're here, so Avi collects, you probably noticed, we have all these individual lines. Avi is collecting logs for all of these requests that come through it. Now there's two types of logs. There is what we call significant logs and then non-significant logs. So non-significant logs are basically everything working as it should. Significant logs are logs that potentially could have, a problem. They could be a 404 error. They could be, 400, whatever the case is. There's something potentially wrong with that request. I typically come in and enable both. You do have the ability to specify a time window. So if you only wanted to look from 9 to 9:30, I could drag over this area, just look at those. Just like we did before, you also have the ability to specify a different time range for these logs. So again, you can say, let's look at the last week, 2 weeks, whatever the case is. Now kind of going into those logs, right? So just to show you a little more of what these look like. So if I expand this one, you saw how there was the end-to-end timing at the top here. Now, if you look below the client, this is all the client metadata. So it's showing us the TLS version they use, their device type, their operating system, location, all that stuff. If you go under the load balancer, this little column right here shows you all of the load balancer details. So, which Avi service engine did that request go through, which is super cool if you think about it, because we could look at this a week later and tell you exactly which Avi service engine handled that request. So from a troubleshooting standpoint, that can be helpful. If we go over to the right, this will show us the actual backend web server in this case that fielded that request, which was Docker Web 3 with this IP. Right below that, we have all of the HTTP headers for this entire transaction. So I can actually hit view all headers. And if I expand all of this, what this first one is showing me, headers received from client. So this is the user sending their headers and their requests to me, right? Then the headers that I'm taking and modifying and sending to the backend server. Below here on the left, we have the headers coming back from the server. And then finally on the right here, we have headers going from us back to the client. Obviously, anything in green is something added by Avi. Anything in this, whatever you call this, orange, reddish, whatever. I'm like an old computer. I only see 16 colors. So whatever color this is things that have been stripped out, right? So this can be helpful again for troubleshooting purposes. The other thing I want to call out here is that anything you see at all in Avi that is blue is searchable and something you can filter on. So let's say, you wanted to look at all requests coming from Korea. You can click on that and you can see here it changed this filter to client location equals KOR for Korea. Now I'm seeing only logs for this virtual service from Korea. And again, I can continue down that path. I can say, show me, show me all requests coming from Korea to this file right here. And you can see how this is changing. If I click this, it will filter on /images. If I do this, it'll be /images header and so on. So I want to match on that entire path. So I do that. Again, now I'm just kind of going down the path even further. So only logs from users in Korea, and only if they're trying to access this, header PNG file, for example. So just wanted to highlight kind of how you can start using that to walk down that path. I mentioned the troubleshooting piece. So, using those filters can be really powerful. So let me, once this pulls up, we'll kind of walk through another example of this. All right. So anything blue is searchable, right? So if you open up here, right, we already kind of went over all of that. Well, that includes anything on this screen as well. So for example, let's use this to troubleshoot something. So we have a 404 here for this logo.png file. So if we wanted to start off with that, we said, users are complaining, they're having issues. Sometimes, getting to this logo.png file, we can go ahead and filter on that. That's a good starting point. So that comes up and we see here under response, we do have some of these working. So some users are able to get to that image. Some are getting 404s. This is, in my opinion, this is like a nightmare scenario to troubleshoot without Avi, because you simply, you get to the point where, I previously did troubleshoot an issue like this and I ended up flying to California, interviewing hospital staff, doctors, nurses, trying to figure out what common theme there was between all of them, because, some people had issues and some didn't, right? So in this case, right, thankfully we have the ability to filter. So we can save that plane ride. So we have, we were only looking at logs for logo.png. We have 88,000. Now let's narrow it down. Let's look at only if those logs resulted in a 404 error. There's a question, does Avi sit in front of or behind a Waff? So actually, that's a great question, Jeff. So Avi does come bundled with its own Waff. And that Waff actually runs on the service engine itself. Obviously, you don't have to use it, but it does have a Waff built in. And the cool thing is it's actually included in Avi. So you don't have to, it's not like an upcharge or anything like that to enable Waff. So that's why you do see this Waff field. If you had enabled that on this application, you would see the result from the Waff. And you'd actually see when I open up these requests, you would see some additional details about which pattern it matched and what was the decision by the Waff, even latency introduced by the Waff, that kind of thing. So hopefully that answers your question. So from a troubleshooting standpoint, right? So we looked at logs only from logo.png. We've also looked at only if those requests result in a 404. So now we should see, only files right from logo. We have 404s only. And this is where things get really cool. So I mentioned a while back that I was a big F5 fan, and then I saw the analytics and I was like a total, convert. In fact, I have I think he's 11-month-old German Shepherd that I named, and nobody's going to be surprised by this, Avi. So my German Shepherd, honestly, is named Avi. In fact, he's downstairs, or else when he hears me saying Avi, he'd come running in here. But so that's how cool this is. So we've correlated now all of these logs for issues that we were seeing. Now we go over to the right to the analytics, like I said, the magic sauce. So now what this is going to allow us to do is correlate things. So if we start with browser, it's going to show us the breakdown of different browsers being used only when users are getting 404s, right? Because we don't care about what they're using when things are working, or maybe we do, but we've passed that point. So we come in here and we say, okay, you know what, fairly even breakdown. This is what we would expect from our users. You know, we see lots of Safari, they're using iOS devices. This is fine, right? The important thing is we don't see one that has, 95% or 100% of 404s. So that would be indicative of, browser update gone bad or something weird like that. We come down here to client operating system, same story. We can see the breakdown of what operating systems are our clients using when, having this issue, right? Again, nothing really telling right here, kind of a, decent breakdown, what we would expect. Maybe we think it's an Avi problem. So we want to see which service engine is fielding the request for this service, right? When they get a 404. In this case, we see that we have two service engines. And this is, by the way, proof that Avi is active. We can actually see that 50% roughly of requests are going through both service engines at the same time. So again, if I saw maybe 100% here, that would kind of tell me that there's something more to dig into there. But obviously there's not. So then we continue down that path. Oops, sorry about that. Let me go back. So we continue down that path and we want to look at the actual backend web server. So this is, once this request is load balanced, which web server is responding back, or web servers, plural, are responding back with 404s. Well, we can see here that we know, because we set up this application, we know there's a bunch of web servers, but there's only one web server that is generating the 404s back. Which is 186.200. We can see 100% of those 404s are coming from this server. So this is the part where we screenshot it. We say, okay, well, application team, you need to put that file, that logo.png on that backend server. Or maybe we could write a monitor in Avi to check for the existence of this file. If it sees that file is missing next time, it'll just pull it out of the pool for us. That's another option. Or we could just go manually pull the server out of the pool. So there's a few options at this point, but the takeaway here is troubleshooting was a breeze compared to doing TCP dumps and packet captures and that sort of thing. All right. The other thing that I'll call out that's kind of cool here is I actually had a customer using Avi, fairly new to it, and he said, we're going through some security things. We're trying to understand, the nature of traffic coming through our services, that sort of thing. So he was asking if there was some kind of CLI command, that he can issue to see the breakdown of TLS traffic, which versions are being used, and that sort of thing. So I had to pump, I told him literally, like, stop what you're doing. Let's jump on a Zoom. Let's take a look. So we came into his Avi instance. You notice I cleared out those logs, or those filters, I should say. So now I'm only looking at filters for this virtual service, all of the logs rather. So if I come down here again on those analytics, I have this one called SSL. If I hit that, that's going to show me a breakdown of, again, all of the ciphers and, TLS versions and that sort of thing being used by this application. So I see that, I have 57% of my traffic is 1.2, only 27% is 1.3, right? So this is literally the customer saw this, came in, screenshotted, said, yep, that's what I was looking for. So super easy to navigate. And obviously there's a lot more to the analytics here. I just kind of ran through an example, but that said, I do want to pause there. Again, if you have any questions, use the chat. Absolutely. Feel free to, don't be afraid to ask any questions. The other thing that I want to call out here just really quick is if we go to virtual services right here, I want to change this view. There we go. So if we go here, I mentioned that Avi supports, more than just vCenter, right? Public cloud. I'm being completely honest when I say that the deployment of Avi in public cloud is ridiculously easy. Now you do have to, have access in the public cloud. So if you're on AWS, you do things like IAM roles and that sort of thing, but that's all relatively easy. If you're already in AWS, you know how to do that. The actual config inside of AWS is minimal, right? And Azure for that matter, it's the same story. The cool thing though, is that when you come in here, I'm looking at these virtual services again for this one tenant, for the demo tenant. In Avi, a cloud is anything essentially where your workloads are running. So it's not necessarily a public cloud. In this case, we do have public clouds. We have AWS cloud, Azure cloud. Where you see VMware cloud, that is just vCenter. So this is just meaning I'm integrating with vCenter, and I've got an environment I'm load balancing there as well. But the cool thing is, if I were to go into, I won't go down this path too far, but if I were to go into one of my AWS VIPs, this should look pretty familiar, right? I have my end-to-end timing. If I go into my logs, I have no idea how many logs I'll have here because I have not used this one in a while. But yeah, so this one is nothing going on here. But yeah, there we go. Okay, that was odd. So yeah, you can see here again, I have the same logs I had before. I can still filter like I could. You open it up, this should all look familiar. I have my HTTP headers. So the point is, from a functional kind of operational standpoint, I come in here, I troubleshoot, and I do the configuration and all of that pretty much identical, regardless of where the actual VM sits. So it's kind of rounding out that story about, not having to go to different places and troubleshoot in different ways, or even set up in different ways. This is kind of the single point of truth as it relates to that. So anyway, I'm going to stop there. Bill, I think I'm going to pass it to you if you are good. If not, I can always talk more, but I'll defer to you.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. While you still have your screen shared up there, is there anything else that you want to show everybody as far as like just interaction in the interface? Like, how do you navigate around? Like, where do you start?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go through that real quick. Jeff has a question. Where do we get one of those hats? Jeff, this is a prized possession. There actually, I do have additional ones, but this is gold right now. But yeah, we'll see. Stay tuned. That said, yeah, as far as kind of navigating, let me kind of I'll just go through a couple of them real quick, a couple of things worth calling out. So I didn't go through upgrades and that sort of thing too much, but as it relates to Avi, any upgrades are done from the controller under administration. You literally can do all of your upgrades through here, and it actually is a rolling upgrade. So you can truly do a hitless upgrade. So the way it works is you upgrade your controller then pushes the update to the SEs essentially at that point and orchestrates the movement of things so that you can do that hitless update. So, administration primarily is all of the things you would expect to be here. There's not really anything too exciting. Infrastructure. So if you go to clouds, we kind of talked about this. So, this is one of the first steps when setting up Avi. You come in here, you add your cloud. As far as what's supported, additional, orchestrators, we do have integration with Nsxt. That's a whole nother topic, but there is integration there. In fact, Avi is actually, native to NSX now. So when you buy NSX, you're getting kind of the Avi basic load balancer, which is equivalent to all of the load balancing services NSX had before. But now you have the option to upgrade to what you're seeing now. So there's a really, really tight integration there. Obviously, we talked about vCenter, so you can integrate multiple vCenters here, OpenStack, AWS, Azure, all of the things I mentioned, right? So once you've configured those, really at that point, I would say, your next step is pretty much configuring virtual services. And the cool thing about Avi is the config is, it's cake. If you've ever done this with F5s or Citrix, you know that it's not always super straightforward. So I will show a bit of that. Let's see, there was a chat. Armando. Hey, Armando, how you doing? So yeah, as far as creating the virtual services, there's two ways to do it. There's a basic and advanced setup. I'll just go into the advanced, and I won't go through every little bit of it. But so when you're in here, you have the ability, first of all, to select where do you want to load balance, right? So again, is this on Azure, vCenter, or in AWS? I'll go with vCenter. Once you're in here, you give it a name. So that's just, some generic, Mike's virtual service or something like that, right? You then allocate an IP address. In addition to that, we can also specify what ports we want this service to listen on. This is where I mentioned, if you're familiar with F5, this seems a little familiar. So with F5, or I think even Citrix, when you configure, a service and you want it to be unencrypted, port 80, as well as SSL and port 443, you set up a different VIP for that same service. With Avi, you just do this. We enable SSL, so now it's listing on both of those. We make sure we have a certificate set up in the system. You know, I'm not going to go through this and next and all that, but that's essentially it. That's the bulk of it. In addition to that, if you wanted to set up Waff for this virtual service, again, you have a policy, you select the policy, Waff will now be enabled for this. And we do have learning modes and that sort of thing. Waff on its own, quite honestly, is, you know, probably an hour-long discussion, but it is there. It's super easy to enable. The other thing is, you know, this is where you can also select the pool. So you're selecting that back-end pool. And this is also where things like persistence and your load balancing algorithm and all of that are configured. So if I select Avi demo pool and I hit this pencil. So by the way, there's another way to get to this, but this is just kind of my preferred workflow. If I hit that pencil, I come in here, like I said, load balancing algorithm. You want to select something else, you have that option. Again, that's for this pool specifically. You also have the option as well to set up auto scale policy. So you can say, if, you know, these conditions are met, then go ahead and start scaling out. That's always available as well, which is pretty cool. You also have the option to specify your monitors. So we support passive and active monitors. So that's also there as well. And let me see. Okay, no, that's all I really wanted to hit there. Let's see. I think that's really all I had. Obviously, we can always go more if there's additional questions, but yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
That's great. So question, anyone not aware, Mike has awesome videos on YouTube, classes on Udemy, and no, I'm not trying to get a hat. Okay, great.
I think you might have just gotten one though, Jeff, just saying.
Yeah, anything in the networking world, NSX related, Obvi related, yeah, check out Mike's YouTube channel. It's really good stuff. I think it really helps a lot of people. He does a great job of, you know, making things simple and easy to understand. So that's awesome. So thanks for that. So
yeah, absolutely.
So if you stop sharing, I will go back and share my screen.
Yeah, so real quick while you're doing that, Bill,
Yep.
there was 2 questions. So David asked, is the WAF an extra cost if you own NSX? So if you already own NSX, you do have the Obvi kind of basic load balancer, but that does not include WAF. So the short answer is, if you are on NSX Advanced or Enterprise, you can upgrade to Avi Enterprise. That's really what you want. If you want WAF, you need to upgrade to Avi Enterprise. That will unlock the WAF. And then I thought there was, yeah, so there was another question as well. So we should have at least 2 SEs from each virtual service. So yeah, I should have explained that more. I don't have my whiteboard set up right now. I should have, but think about the service engine as a kind of a container for virtual services. So if you have 2 SEs, you could have 10 virtual services spread out across both of those. So, you know, the question was, do we need 2 SEs for each virtual service? No, you could have 2, you know, service engines dedicated to that service. That's possible. But what we see more commonly is, you know, a couple of service engines and then multiple virtual services on those, if that makes sense. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there real quick.
Yeah, I think that's great. And while we're kind of talking about this, as we wrap up and talk about some of these real life use cases, what are the real life use cases that you're seeing customers use Obvi for? What do you see in the field?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'd say, you know, yeah, you've got a few here, right? So one of the big ones actually that's been really, you know, happening a lot is, you know, multi-cloud simplification of the load balancer environment. We have a lot of customers that have F5s. That's probably the one most commonly seen, right? And I think, you know, we're seeing a lot of them come to us and say, well, now we've got 2 sites. We want to, and a lot of them are looking at things like federation and that sort of thing, or stretching networks, whether it's with NSX or not. We want to be able to do global load balancing between them. We want to be able to load balance in AWS, that sort of thing. We don't have visibility. So I would say I feel like the number one is more kind of just modernization and simplification of load balancing. That's what I feel like we've run into the most, but yeah.
That's good. So what's VMware's current support for the NSX T native load balancers? That could be around for a while. What are we looking for there?
Yeah, so it's kind of a weird middle ground right now. So when you get NSX, you install NSX, you're using Avi essentially going forward. Whether you know it or not, it's there. It will actually orchestrate the deployment of these Avi components. But from a feature set standpoint, it's going to be very stripped down. It's only active standby load balancing, no Waff, no GSLB, no advanced analytics, very, very basic, health monitors, that sort of thing. So that's going to continue to be there. But I think the direction VMware is clearly going is if you buy NSX and you want to do, I would say more than just basic layer 4 load balancing, then you're going to have to upgrade. So it will be there. Avi is going forward the path forward, and the old load balancer is essentially dead. That was actually, the code started being swapped out on that actually as of I think 3.0. So now we're on 3.2. So under the hood, it is Avi today.
What about customers that have 2 data centers and they want to do Avi in their primary data center, and they have this business continuity or disaster recovery scenario? Does Avi support that today, or how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one is, so again, one of the things I kind of hit on, I said multiple times, the cool thing, one of the things I like about Avi is there's no upsells for these different features. So if you wanted to do GSLB and load balance between those data centers, so maybe active, that's included as part of Avi. So you buy Avi Enterprise, you get WAF, GSLB, analytics, everything, right? Now the other piece is, what happens to Avi? So if I have 2 sites and I have Avi in one site, the management pieces, if I lose that, load balancing continues to function. So the SEs can run in a headless mode, right? So that's good. But now in terms of management, typically what we're seeing customers do, which isn't I don't think it's the prettiest answer, but essentially within Avi, you have the ability to back up natively inside the controller. So you would essentially, if you lost location A where Avi is at, you would just do a restore at site B. So there's some ways to do it, but yeah, ultimately it can absolutely span multiple sites, and we have a lot of customers using it for that.
Okay, great. I'm going to go through a few things here. If you see something here you want to chime in on, please do. So we're talking about use cases in general. So what we see in the field is customers have an existing NSX-V load balancer, and they're migrating to T, and they want to be able to maintain their existing load balancer, but they want to do it the new cool way. So one thing that we see is customers leveraging that, right? The ability to make it less complex, as you said, especially if they're doing load balancers on-prem and in the cloud. The analytics is great. I love the way you showed how they can leverage that. And, they're definitely not going to have that in their NSX-V load balancer, right? But they're definitely going to gain that with the advanced load balancer. Maybe some WAF use. We get a lot of questions about WAF when we're talking to customers, and even a question popped up today. So they want that extra security that you can leverage with that capability. One of the challenges that we see is when we're going to be deploying a new load balancer solution is customers need to migrate their VIPs from an existing whatever load balancer they're using, whether it's an NSX-V load balancer or whether it's an F5 load balancer, and they want to be able to migrate. So a lot of questions that we get is, how do we do that? And how can we do it without re-IPing? There is a complex question and a complex answer, but there are ways to do it where you can not re-IP the backend pools and possibly re-IP the VIP or go to a new VIP. You can also keep the existing pool and VIPs depending on the outage you want to take or cannot take, right? So there are definitely some options there. The other thing that we get a lot of is this whole basic versus enterprise license level. If you're a VMware customer and you're using NSX, we highly recommend, that you look at going to the enterprise license. As Mike said, it's very stripped back. It's going to work, it's going to perform, but it's not going to give you all those advanced analytics and features and so on. Another question that we get a lot in the field is Obvi sizing. How many SEs do I need? And the reason that's important is there's a license involved. So if they're going to go to the enterprise license, how do we do that? Now, there is a particular worksheet that we actually use, and there's some built-in tooling in some of the VMware tools that we can use. If you're an existing F5 customer, there's a way for us to pull data from your F5 environment to give us an idea of an approximation of how many service cores you need on your Avi deployment, because that's going to drive it, because most customers are going to want that enterprise license. 27 Virtual has done that for several customers, and that's something we can definitely help you with. What do we need? We're going to deploy the 3 controllers. We're going to deploy the SEs and the SE group. How many do we need approximately? Of course, you can always scale out as needed, and Mike showed the option there to do the scale out capability, but we need a place to start, right? And then the actual selection of what that's going to be. What's the Avi deployment going to look like? You saw in the dropdown that Mike showed, there's different options. There's Nsxt Cloud, there's vSphere, there's AWS, Azure, right? What's the deployment going to be? What's it going to look like from a design perspective? What's your licensing choice and what's your sizing? All these are going to be important as you make that decision. Once it's all deployed, either you're lucky enough to be greenfield and it's all brand new load balancing, like you've never done load balancing before, you're starting for the first time, which is possible. Or maybe the load balancing you have currently is pretty minimal, and going to a new one is not such a big deal. If that's not the case, then there's going to be this discussion about how to migrate. So those all come into play for what we see in the field. This is one use case that we've seen. This is an example of a customer that's running NSXV load balancer. And the NSXV load balancer is running in an interesting architecture where it's active standby NSXV ESGs, and the VIP actually lives in the active ESG. And what they're doing is they're actually plumbing a segment, even though there's a DLR, they're plumbing a segment. If you see the .5s there at the top, let me annotate this. I'm going to run out of time here in a few minutes, but we're going to, these are our VIPs up here, and they actually have a network segment plugged directly into this ESG to each segment. So this one ESG is acting as a central load balancer for each one of these segments, right? So that's kind of an example of what this current customer is doing. So how do we get them over to, a brand new deployment using NSXT and still doing load balancing a similar way as much as possible? What you see on the right is an NSXT deployment with NSXT edges, a T0 and a T1, and what we call a management segment in black on the right, and then a VIP data segment on the left in red. The Avi controllers are up on the top left. So we deploy the Avi controllers. There's going to be a VIP to get access to that controller cluster that will sit on a regular management network. We're going to deploy the Obvi as an NSXT cloud, as Mike showed. And then we're going to put the service engines, just an example of 2. We're going to put them out there, and one leg is going to plug into the management, and one leg is going to plug into the VIP data segment. The thing that's really interesting about this is it allows you to have multiple NSXT segments with workloads, and we can deploy it in a way where certain IP addresses on the red are the VIP range and another range on the same segments for workloads, or we just don't put any workloads at all. Like this red segment is called a VIP data segment, but often it ends up being a VIP only segment. And then our actual data segment can be somewhere else, right? So that's definitely an option. And the benefit of that is that you're not deploying Avi SEs on every segment. So from a licensing perspective, it allows you to have centralized Avi and load balance from there and get everything load balancing to those other segments on the left. So you can see I've changed the slide a little bit. On the right was the way we were doing it in NSXV, and on the left is the way we're doing it in NSXT. So it's an interesting way to do it. Now, in this case, we did re-IP the VIPs, but the backend server pools maintain the same IP address. We use a migration process to migrate the workloads over to T, and we're able to load balance out for that, right? You could attempt to keep the VIPs. You could do that and keep the VIP IP address and the backend pool members the same. However, you would have to have an outage to make that change. Another option 3 would be separate SEs on each segment. You have your controllers, you deploy SEs on each segment. It's going to consume more licenses, but allows you more scale, right? So you can kind of take any of these approaches that will work. And then vSphere Cloud is just regular Avi SEs using vCenter with no knowledge of NSXT and then pointing out to those segments. So it's very flexible, many different ways to do it. 27 Virtual can help you with these different options. We work with people like Mike at VMware and their team to help get you guys enabled and get Avi deployed. And let me just pull up the chat there.
I've got some reminders for William.
Okay, let's get the questions are answered. I just want to make sure all questions are answered in the chat, right? And I'm just going to end there. We're right at 2 o'clock. So, let us know if you guys need any help. 27 Virtual, we can do Obvi POCs, use case assessments, anything you guys need, right? We do Obvi sizing assessment. We can actually get this set up and do demos. We can take this workshop we're doing online and bring it to your organization, and we can leverage PSO credits. When you leave the webinar, there's a questionnaire. Make sure you fill that out. And this will be recorded and put up on our website. You can share this with anybody that wants to see more about Avi. Michael, thank you very much for helping out. Thank you, everybody. And we'll stay on here for a few minutes. If you guys have any other questions or you want to chat, we can open that up as well. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you.